fellow Americans.
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending him in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planning information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually, the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plan in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done, and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem. We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals.
So do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this this is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over a cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email. And all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was still
already
in
done.
Parliament,
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be in the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the major's. The major's assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway. Or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip. Because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, They get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me, and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a sec." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show, but if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, one of the 4 principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbunda women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, you know, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everybody, to Redacted on this Thursday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natalie Morris.
So glad to see all of you guys, and so glad to have our 2 million subscribers here with us on this Thursday. So great to see all of you on YouTube, and 350,000 of us, of you guys following us on Rumble, which is so exciting. So we just, on the same day, passed 350,000 and 2 million on those different platforms. So welcome, welcome, welcome into the show. We've got a very busy show for you on this Thursday. President Biden says President Putin is ready to pull nuclear weapons and to use nuclear weapons. The rhetoric is ramping up. And what does that mean for NATO? Because now that the offensive has officially basically collapsed, do they go back to the drawing board and try to recalibrate and pull off another spring offensive, or do something even more drastic, which could push us towards nuclear war? We're going to discuss all of that in a moment.
We just passed the summer solstice, so they cannot do a spring offensive in the year 2023. It would only be a summer offensive if we get that rhetoric wrapped up. We are also going to talk to Tara Reade. She is the person who claimed that President Joe Biden sexually assaulted her in 1993. She reported at the time. There is a paper trail of this investigation for years and years. She has sought political asylum in Russia. We're going to talk to her about why she did that, what she was facing inside the United States, and she has offered to testify to the subcommittee on weaponizing the federal government because she believes that she has been persecuted by people in power all along. And we're going to see what she has to say. It's a terrifying story. It could happen to anybody.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this Dutch housing story. It's absolutely crazy. The Dutch government moving forward with a bill to basically make it illegal for you to sell your property to anyone you want to. You have to then sell it to someone who is of lower means than you. What does this mean for the future of housing inside of the Netherlands? They've already taken away farmers' rights. They've already taken away the farms. Now they're going to take away housing? This is the World Economic Forum's dream.
That's stealing equity.
Yeah.
That's saying you can only sell your house for this much. So if you're somebody who thought that you were investing in your house as your main asset, that's no longer a performing asset for you. That's theft. That's theft of public. What do you call it when you using a domain?
Yeah, eminent domain.
Eminent domain, right?
Yeah,
they're taking what is yours.
Yeah, so we'll have all of that and more as Redacted starts right now. Welcome, everybody.
Here we go. This is our Thursday show. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the show where we cover things that the mainstream media largely ignores. If you are watching the mainstream media, you must see wall-to-wall coverage of this Titanic explosion, or implosion, rather. We are not going to cover that tonight. We are covering, we cover more geopolitics and things like that. But that is one of the stories that we've mentioned in the newsletter. If you follow our newsletter, you can go to redacted.inc. It is a daily newsletter, Monday through Thursday. It's a free subscription. It only requires an email address. And then we send you every day the day's top stories, some links to original sources around those stories, plus some sort of extra bits and bobs. So please do subscribe to the newsletter because we work really hard on it. And it's meant as like a, compendium or a companion piece to this show. A lot of content there for you to archive and read and sometimes have a little chuckle over. So again, thank you for subscribing to the newsletter. It's redacted.inc.
Well, has the much vaunted spring offensive from the Ukrainian side come to a screeching halt now that the calendar has turned into summer? Well, that's what we heard yesterday from Russian President Vladimir Putin, who says the signs are that the strategic reserves from Ukraine have been depleted and that their counteroffensive has come to a grinding halt. So what does this mean? Take a listen.
Мужики наколотили 245 танков противника и примерно 678 бронемашин разного типа. И, судя по всему, противник занимается тем, что сейчас комбинирует из бригад, которые понесли серьезные потери, новое подразделение, занимается восстановлением боеспособности, но, конечно, опасается таких же масштабных потерь в будущем, потому что это может привести не только к утрате боеспособности.
Meanwhile, European leaders continue to shovel more money and more weapons into Ukraine. We heard this from UK, we heard this from Ursula von der Leyen, and we also heard it from the United States side. More money, more weapons to Ukraine, because sending more money and weapons to Ukraine means that you are defending democracy when you support Ukraine. Our next guest is Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, former U.S. Marine, who's just written a piece in Consortium News about this nuclear threat and where we are headed potentially to potentially nuclear war. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to unpack all of these things. I first want to touch on your most recent piece, which we heard from President Biden over the past 48 hours on a fundraising trip, by the way, that he's been warning us, of course, about Vladimir Putin, saying he thinks that there's a real possibility that Putin's going to use nuclear weapons. And meanwhile, the other side, on the Russian side, seems to be saying the exact opposite. So you've written this new piece on that specific question on nuclear war. Can you unpack that? Explain to us what your piece is about and where we're headed in this mess right now.
Well, I think we need to understand, first of all, that we live in a world where there's two competing nuclear doctrines. One is the American nuclear doctrine, which Biden has inherited from Trump, who inherited it from Obama, who inherited it from Bush. And this is a doctrine that embraces the notion of preemptive nuclear war, a winnable nuclear war, a world where the United States can envision using nuclear weapons preemptively in an effort to escalate, to de-escalate. That is, showing the other side that we're serious about this and that causing them to back down. We have to keep in mind that the doctrine that exists under Biden is the doctrine that was in place when a senior Trump administration defense official said, our goal in having this doctrine, and this is a direct quote, our goal is to ensure that every morning when the Russians and Chinese wake up, they don't know whether or not we're going to nuke them. That's the American nuclear strategy. I want people to understand. Let that sink in. And that's the Biden strategy. This is the strategy that Tony Blinken has behind him as he goes forth and does his aggressive policies. The strategy that Jake Sullivan is backed up with when he makes his aggressive policies. And it's the strategy that should be bouncing around inside the muddled brain of Joe Biden when he says ridiculous things such as, I've been warning everybody about Putin. I've been warning them that, the threat of nuclear war is real. No, the only threat of nuclear war comes from the United States, and people should understand that. The only threat of nuclear war comes from the United States. What Russia has said is that they have no intention of using nuclear weapons, tactical or otherwise, unless their nuclear doctrine is triggered. And that one is, of course, if the existential survival of Russia is put at risk, then Russia will use all means available to ensure the continued survival of Russia. That's sort of common sense. I mean, that's why you would have nuclear weapons to begin with, to ensure your continued survival. So, we're in a situation now where we have the United States. Jake Sullivan just gave a presentation at the Arms Control Association earlier this month, talking about the conditions under which America would pursue arms control with the Russians, totally unrealistic expectations. And Putin gave an interesting response because, as Putin is wont to do every now and then, he throws in sort of man on the street, salt of the earth colloquialisms. And he did at this time. He said, now they want to talk about disarmament. They want to come in and look at our strategic nuclear deterrence system at a time when the goal of the United States is to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia.
Right. And
then he used the term khrenim, loosely translates into pound sand. Now there's a more crude version of that, but and the crowd loved it. But that's the Russian approach right now. The heck with you.
Right. We're going to come in. We're going to restart. We're going to come in and investigate your nuclear stockpiles. as we continue to funnel billions of dollars in weapons into Ukraine to attack on pre-war Russian land.
And this brings us up to the comments you made earlier about van der Leyen and the Europeans talking about supporting Ukraine to the bitter end. Understand that Ukraine's strategic vision is that victory is defined by the return of Zaporizhia, Kherson, Lugansk, Donetsk, and Crimea, basically the pre-1991 borders. They have to be returned to Ukraine. But Russia has absorbed these territories. Constitutionally, they're part of Russia, which means any effort to do this represents an existential threat to the survival of Russia, just like stripping California away from the United States would represent an existential threat to the United States. And so what we're saying is we support Ukraine's effort to guarantee a Russian nuclear response that brings about an end to the world. That's what this is about. And this, again, is coupled with just the sick notion. I mean, Ukraine keeps saying we want to be a member of NATO. But Ukraine has to understand that the United States and NATO is operating under a George Soros-driven notion that speaks of the need to have an Eastern European manpower pool that will be married to NATO technology to threaten Russia. If you understand what I just said, Ukraine will never be part of NATO because they are simply the meat that will be attached to NATO technology to weaken Russia. So our grand strategy of using Ukraine to weaken Russia, combined with Ukraine's sick fantasy of somehow gaining control over these former territories, all lead to triggering Russia's nuclear response. We're committing suicide as we speak, and people need to wake up and understand this, that the policies that the United States and NATO are pursuing right now are policies guaranteed to result in a Russian use of nuclear weapons. And now a Russian strategic theorist, historian and academic, Sergei Karaganov, has just written an important piece. And what's important about this is that his opinions are listened to, and they are reflective of mainstream thinking in Russia. And he said it's time for Russia to change its nuclear posture into adapting its own preemptive policy. And it's time, if NATO and the United States continues to pursue these policies, that Russia preemptively uses a nuclear weapon against NATO and compels the United States to consider, are we willing to exchange the city of Boston for the city of Poznan? That's a Polish city that under the Karaganov theorem would be struck preemptively with a Russian nuclear weapon, sending a signal to NATO that we're done playing games. The question now is, what would an American president do when that happens? Would the American president be willing now to commit to defend Poznan, defend Poland, defend NATO with an American nuclear response, knowing that it would cost American cities? And that's a fair question. And the fact that the Russians are considering this, are bantering this about at the highest levels, means that we are losing control of the nuclear genie. Roger Waters wrote a song, Two Suns in the Sunset. And there's a chorus in there, the rusty wire that holds the cork that keeps the anger in gives way, and suddenly it's day again. That rusty wire is real. That was the arms control framework that people like myself and others put in place with the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. That's gone. The rusty wire is about to give way, and it's over, ladies and gentlemen, over. And it's happening now in front of us as we speak. We have a president who is, when he was a senator in the Senate, was never right on any national security issue. Just ask, Robert Gates, former defense secretary, says Biden was wrong on everything. Well, he's now the commander in chief. And once again, he's wrong on everything. He's surrounded himself with people who are likewise wrong on everything, who have imbued themselves with this dangerous fantasy that America can impose its will. And we are compelling Europe to commit suicide in Ukraine. And in doing so, making possible the notion of a Russian preemptive nuclear strike against a NATO ally that could bring the United States in. This is real. I agree with President Biden at this point in time. This is as real as it gets, and it's happening right now in front of us, and we're sleepwalking through this. We, the collective West, don't understand what's happening. And by the time the lights go off, it's going to be too late, because the lights going off are going to be the thermonuclear warheads landing in the vicinity of your neighborhood, and you'll have about a millisecond to reflect on, oh, damn, we were foolish, before you're evaporated. This is as real as it gets.
And that Roger Waters song you're talking about, when he refers to the daylight, he's not talking about a sunrise. He's talking about nuclear fallout. He's talking about the total destruction. And we could, absolutely potentially see that. And I think a lot of people have to ask the question, if we're so concerned, if we've been so concerned about Ukraine's safety and security and democracy, and there's all this talk and bluster about them joining the EU, why are they not in NATO?
Because that would automatically trigger a nuclear conflict. Plus, we never want them in NATO. We don't want them in the European Union. We don't want Ukraine to be anything other than a nation that provides us with unlimited supply of fresh meat to throw into the meat grinder against Russia, in the hopes that we can hurt Russia more than, not they hurt Ukraine, because we don't care about Ukraine. I hope people wake up to understand the following too. All those people that are out there putting the Ukrainian flags on their social media, putting them out in front of their house, this virtue signaling that I'm for Ukraine, all you're doing is condemning Ukrainian men to death. This counteroffensive has failed because it was always doomed to fail. It was never going to succeed. And the irony is, we knew that. We knew that when we trained them. Any military professional will tell you straight up, you can't take people and put them and try to train them on complex technology in a very limited period of time. So all they know how to do is turn it on, turn left, turn right, rotate the turret, load, and then say, oh, you're ready to go to war. War is people who have a sixth sense about their equipment. As they go in, they can listen to the engine, understand that they can get a little bit more out of it, a little bit less. They know how to pause. They know how to pivot, roll, move, shoot, pull back. It's an intimacy that you develop with your equipment over years of experience, not 5 weeks, not 5 days. And then we turn around and we employ them in a combat, the most complicated military mission imaginable, which is an assault, a breaching assault of a fortified defensive position. It is the hardest thing to do in the military. It's the most bloody thing to do. It will only work if everything goes right, and nothing was going to go right ever, because one of the prerequisites of a breaching assault is the first phase, which is suppression. That as you are going through the minefields and the obstacle belts, approaching the defensive line, you need to suppress in totality the enemy's ability to interdict your movement to the target. That means you need an air force that is capable of clearing the skies of the enemy air force. You need artillery that suppresses enemy artillery. You need fire support that knocks out the local defenses so that your troops can work their way through the minefield. The Ukrainians don't have an air force, which means Russia controls the airways. The Russian Air Force, Russian helicopters are slaughtering the Ukrainians before they even get to the defensive belt. Then they get mired down in the minefields, and the Russian artillery comes on and does the rest. We're jamming their communications. The Russians are jamming their communications, doing it. And the end result is these Ukrainians haven't even reached the initial defensive line. An assault against a breaching assault against a defensive position is only a success when you clear the final defensive line on the opposite side of the defensive line of all enemy forces. Now you have breached the lines. There's 3 defensive belts that the Russians have. Ukrainians haven't even reached the first one, and they can't succeed until they breach all 3. They're never going to do it, and we knew it from the start. We literally train these people to die, and that's what's happening, and that's why Putin accurately notes that this counteroffensive is over.
That's unbelievable. So they haven't even reached the first defensive belt. And so for all of the bluster and hearing these reports in the Western media that the counteroffensive is sluggish, it's not going as well as they'd like, is really a total lie and a fantasy, that it's not doing anything at all other than consuming Ukrainian lives and throwing these men into the meat grinder. So when Putin says yesterday that this is ground to a halt, he says, I see calm, there's really nothing going on. What does this mean then for any sort of offensive left? You've said this thing has been over. It's all that's left is the fighting. It's like the picking up of scraps at this point. So what will happen as the U.S. and EU continues to funnel weapons into this mess?
Well, the sad thing is that this offensive has no legitimate military objective because you can't achieve it. I mean, that's like me creating the Scott Ritter Space Agency and saying that it is my objective to be on Mars in a year and a half. And people say, well, that ain't never going to happen because you don't have the budget, you don't have the technology, you don't have the infrastructure. You got nothing but an idea. For the Ukrainians to say that they want to punch through the Russian defensives, get to the Sea of Azov, cut off Crimea, cut off the land bridge connecting Crimea to Russia, threaten Crimea and get the Russians to surrender is like me saying I'm going to be on Mars in a year and a half. It just isn't going to happen. It's incapable of happening. What the Ukrainians have to do, however, is create the perception that they can continue to pose a viable military threat to Russia worthy of the NATO investment in them. Now, what's happened so far with this counteroffensive is the exact opposite. What they're demonstrating is the truth, that no matter what NATO does, Ukraine will never be able to defeat Russia. Moreover, Russia will eventually strategically defeat Ukraine, regardless of the NATO assistance. And so Zelensky can't afford to have NATO roll into its summit on July 11th with this perception. So he is going to be compelled to continue to throw troops, double down on stupid, continue to throw troops into the breach because he has to show something on July 11th. But what he's going to show is the total destruction of the 60,000 strong Ukrainian force that NATO has been building since October of last year. It's going to be eliminated. And then the question confronting NATO is, do we do this again? And now here's the issue, because we now know that Leopard tanks aren't magic. They burn. They burn very well. We know that Bradley infantry fighting vehicles aren't magic. They burn. We know that the Storm Shadow is not a magic weapon. It gets shot down. And so now the question is, if they say, hey, we're going to continue to support, you can't use the same formula that has already failed. So the next wave of support will include F-16 fighters, ATACMS long-range missiles. You see, now we're escalating the issue further. And then when that fails, because it will fail, what's next after that? And we get into the ridiculousness where we have a former Secretary General of NATO, Rasmussen, talking about creating a coalition of the willing, that is NATO members operating not as NATO, but their own distinct coalition to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. So now we have that escalation. What happens when they get annihilated and you have the imagery of 10,000 Polish troops being marched into a Russian prisoner of war camp? Does Germany come in? And then if the Germany comes in, are they going to do it by themselves? Or are they going to articulate for an Article 4 covered by NATO? And now we have NATO-Russian involvement in Ukraine, and they are one step away from the world ending. This is the stupidity of this escalation. People need to stop this nonsense. NATO will never beat Russia. NATO will never beat Russia. That will never happen. The United States will never beat Russia. We don't have the military capacity to defeat Russia in a large-scale ground conflict in Europe. That is a statement of fact. We could put everything America has in Europe today, and the Russians will beat us because we're not that good anymore. Now, we could spend trillions of dollars to rebuild the American conventional warfighting capability, but that's going to take years. The army we have right now cannot fight the Russians. It's physically unable to fight the Russians. As General Cavoli, the commander of U.S. forces in Europe and the Supreme Allied Commander, noted last January in a presentation he made to a Swedish Defense Forum, the scope and scale of the violence taking place in Ukraine between the Ukrainians and the Russians is beyond the imagination of NATO. Listen to what I just said, beyond the imagination. Now, if you're a military planner, that means you haven't imagined this, so everything you're planning for doesn't take into account reality. You don't have the firepower necessary. You don't have the force structure necessary. You don't have the tactics. You don't have the equipment. You don't have anything necessary to fight that conflict. And that's the state of play with NATO forces today. They spent the last 20 years preparing to do nation building in Afghanistan, low intensity conflict around the world, limited military peacekeeping missions in Europe. The last thing NATO has been preparing to do is put 120,000 men across the border to carry out large-scale ground combat against a peer-level force who is combat hardened and has been doing this for 15 months, is more prepared than they are. NATO can't do this, and yet van der Leyen, Stoltenberg, and others continue to pretend as if NATO has this capacity. They don't. NATO is bankrupt. They're bankrupt in terms of their training, their capacity. They've given all their weapons away to Ukraine. That's been burned up. They don't have the ability to build new weapons. Germany has just come out and they're sort of admitting that all this talk about spending 100 billion euros to rebuild the German army is just talk, because no matter what Rheinmetall wants to do, they can't afford the steel. Nobody can make the steel because of high energy costs. The raw materials necessary to build this military either can't be procured or are too expensive to be procured. And that's all of Europe is in that situation. So this notion of a rebuilt NATO army, et cetera, or in America, find a defense contractor right now that's prepared to do the short-term contracting necessary to produce the weapons that Ukraine needs. They won't. Why? Because their job isn't to create an American or a global defense capable of standing up to Russian. Their job is to make money. Their job is contracting. So they say, if you want us to do this, we need long-term contracts. So we produce enough equipment so that the profit margin is sufficient to make our investors and our board members happy. Russia doesn't have that problem. When Putin and the Russian leadership say, we need you to do X, Y, and Z, the Russian defense industry says, yep, we're doing it, because they work for the state. They actually care about the defense of the state. Lockheed Martin and Raytheon don't give a rat's ass, excuse my language, about the defense of America. They only care about the bottom line. And right now, they are saying, we're not going to do the short-term contracting that you want us to do to meet the supply requirements for Ukraine. We need longer-term contracts, but that's very expensive. And now we run into budget issues because Congress has to weigh in on that. And now we get a debate within Congress about whether or not this is the right thing to do.
What an absolute mess. Incredibly sobering. And yeah, high energy costs in Germany. Maybe you could have called your friends who blew up your Nord Stream pipeline and had a discussion about that before that happened on top of it. I hope that people pay attention to what you just said. Really, really sobering and eye-opening, and I hope people pay attention to it. Scott Ritter, great to see you as always. Thank you so much for this. I encourage people to go and read Scott's newest piece in Consortium News on this nuclear escalation, and we are slow walking right there. Scott, thank you so much for this. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Scott. And what's amazing to hear is like when he says, one of the guys who built the framework or helped build the framework for a post-Cold War nuclear agreement is telling you that it's falling apart, it's collapsing. That's like the founder, the creator of the 401k plan telling you that it's a failure and that you shouldn't put all of your eggs in a 401k because it's a terrible way to retire. You pay attention to that.
And what's being fed to us at this moment? Just today, Zelensky went on Twitter and said we have intelligence about nuclear threats. And so and then earlier this week, President Biden upped the ante on nuclear threats. So we are being invited to think of nuclear threats in the same way we were asked to think of weapons of mass destruction, right? Yeah. We can't verify it. We're not sure. It's too far away and it's too scary to comprehend. So we buy into it while they continue to grab power and money in their war efforts.
Right. And another thing that Scott said that really stood out to me is the idea that, hey, they've already tried the spring offensive. It failed. They have 60,000 people, these reservists that they brought in for this. It's now collapsed. Zelensky says he's upset with the progress of it, which is code for it's failed. It's done. So what Scott said is incredibly poignant. I mean, to say, well, what do? Either you repeat what you just tried once again, do it again, another like faux offensive, get another 60,000 people together and try it again. It'll fail again. Or you escalate. And that appears to be what NATO is doing, which is now we're going to have long-range weapons. Now we're making sure that you're getting those F-16s, which we promised you we wouldn't get. You would not get because that would be World War III. Remember? No, F-16s? Absolutely not, Biden said. That would be World War III. Tanks? World War III. So that ship has sailed.
No, they have tanks. And this morning, Der Spiegel published a story about some of the Ukrainian soldiers who are using those tanks. They're saying, basically we got a whole bunch of briefings and they said, blah, blah, blah. We didn't completely understand it. And the controls are in German. And it just sort of came down to push this button here.
And
one guy said he's using the laser pointer because he doesn't understand the equipment enough. And he's like, well, it at least has a laser aimer. So I'll use that. Right. And that when they actually, some of them were taken to Germany for training, it was, a lot of it in a language they didn't understand, and then they took them out to a bar so that they could sort of forget while they're there, because it was such a daunting task, and they all knew it, that they were being asked to do something impossible. And some of the quotes were that, we pretend it's not working so that we don't have to drive it into battle. Or they run before, it's better to, coward out. I don't think that's the right word. Cowardly is not the right word for it. Renege before you go in, then renege in the beginning. These people are scared.
And this is Der Spiegel.
They don't have any business there.
This is Der Spiegel, by the way. So, main German newspaper, one of the main German newspapers, reporting this, that they're saying that these Ukrainians who are in these German tanks and other tanks are saying they're broken. We don't know how to use these things, so we don't have to go into battle.
Yeah.
You're asking these men to die. That's what you're doing. And again, this is NATO asking these men to die. They don't give a shit about Ukrainians. It's NATO who wants these people to die for us.
And imagine if these guys have the knowledge of a peace agreement being signed before and then ignoring it. So it's what are we fighting for? Why would they want to drive a tank in the battle when they don't understand why they're doing it in the first place?
Right. Yeah, they're being asked. They're being asked to basically suicide mission. They know they're going to die. You're being asked for NATO's political ends.
Yeah.
That's what you're being asked to do.
And what Russia is doing is holding a line of a territory that voted to be a part of Russia and asked Russia to intervene because they had been being attacked by Ukrainian forces prior to this war. It's not these guys that are there now that have been attacking all along. These are green, inexperienced people who have the right to life and liberty and should be able to just leave if they want to. But they can't. Ukraine never let them.
Yeah. Patrick Lancaster is going to have some special reports. He is with some of the special military trainers in Chechnya. He just arrived in Chechnya, and he filed this report to give us a preview of what reports he's going to be learning on the front lines with these special forces. Watch.
Hello, Redacted. Right now, I'm at the top of a skyscraper in the center of Grozny, Chechnya. We've got a lot of stories coming up here. We're going to be going to the Russian Special Forces University to see how they train the Special Forces before they go to the front line. And then we're also going to be seeing the internal forces, or police, or MVD, as the Russians call it, their forces here in Chechnya. Some of the war veterans, and they're going to be giving a demonstration on their technical abilities to engage specific strategic targets, and this will be live fire exercises both there and in the Special Forces University. So we got a lot of great reports. Just want to give you guys this update, and we'll see you later, Redacted.
All right, thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it. And yeah, those reports will be coming later in the week, or beginning part of next week, as we head into the weekend here. So thank you, Patrick, for that. We've got a lot more news to get to here on your Thursday night. Thank you guys for joining us live. We are live right now. Thanks to everyone in the chat. Let us know. James Figueroa, nice to see you. Jack Klugman is here. Jack Klugman is here. Jack Klugman. Wow.
That's somebody you know?
Jack Klugman from Dallas fame? No, right? Isn't Jack Klugman the actor from Dallas?
I don't know.
I believe so.
Right?
I remember it, but I can't pinpoint what he came from.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was the Dallas famous actor from Dallas.
Well, James Figueroa is just as famous. He's been with us since early Redacted days.
That's right. But Jack Klugman,
longer than I have.
Oh, yeah. The Oscar and Felix. The Odd Couple.
Yes. That's right. Jack Klugman said it's great that Redacted employs some excellent journalists. Thank you so much. That's right. So good to see all of you guys. We're going to be speaking with Tara Reade, who of course is President Biden's accuser, accused him of sexual assault back in the day, and then has had her life turned upside down as a result of this, and now sees a number of people have told her people from the intelligence community. She's gotten word that her life has been in danger, and so she's seeking asylum in Russia. We're going to speak to her about what that's like, what is happening with her testimony in front of Congress about President Biden. That's coming up next.
All right, and we are going to talk about this story, which is it's a transgender sexual crime that's being hidden from us.
In Boston,
we're going to talk about the nuance around that word, because absolutely words matter, especially as we think about the threat to our children, and why the media is choosing one victim group here, and it's not the children. So we're going to get to that in a minute. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at PHX Phoenix Capital. With banks collapsing and the turbulent state of the stock market, millions of Americans have watched their retirement savings disappear. That's why we want to share with you a unique investment opportunity that's not only protecting retirement savings, but investors are seeing consistent yields and growth. Phoenix Capital Group is offering high-value U.S. oil and gas investments through their corporate bonds. It's a way for people to invest in energy assets and diversify their portfolio. Yield range from 8 to 12% APY, paid monthly with different qualifications and maturity dates. Phoenix Capital Group is a tech-led energy company owning in some of the most lucrative basins across America. Investor capital, along with their own capital, goes towards positive cash flow and gas projects. They had the choice of offering a significantly lower interest rate and paying the difference to middleman, but decided to break the mold and bring stronger investments directly to investors. So these 8 to 12% APY corporate bonds are higher than CDs or annuities and often more than double the typical yields. So if you're looking for an alternative investment with sizable yields and monthly payment options, we highly recommend that you check out Phoenix Capital Group's bond offerings. You can learn more by downloading their free investor guide today at phxonredacted.com. That's phxonredacted.com, and let them know that you heard it from us. Well, our guest today is Tara Reade, who is coming to our show from Russia, where she is seeking political asylum. She is also seeking safety from the United Nations because her and her lawyers claim that her human rights have been compromised by the United States and the federal government, which is weaponizing the Justice Department in order to, I guess, how would we put it, politically attack her. Because she has come forward with her sexual allegations from President Joe Biden from 1993. So thank you so much for joining me today, Tara. I know the news today is that your lawyer has sent an email to Representative Jim Jordan volunteering to testify about the persecution you've suffered for the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. So how are you? This seems like a big turn of events, and what can you tell us about it?
Well, hi. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I watch it. You're one of my main news sources, so I'm really hopeful other people are supportive too. Your show's fantastic, you and Clayton, and the work that you're doing to bring truth. All I can say is last time we were here, it was like a pipe dream. I could testify before Congress, and then Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene made that a reality, not only to testify about my case and what happened when I was a staffer for Joe Biden and was sexually assaulted, to get that investigated and looked at, but also things evolved and changed, as you all know, because you've been covering it, with the weaponization of the DOJ and the FBI against U.S. citizens, including myself. And there's a subcommittee hearing on it led by Jim Jordan. And so my attorneys, as you mentioned, have signaled to them that I am willing to testify under oath remotely because I am in Moscow, Russia now. And I have sought asylum. I do have temporary asylum. I'm waiting for all the paperwork to be completed. And I am seeking citizenship in Russia. So yes, this was a very sudden turn of events. And yeah, I'll let you
Well, one of the
comment on that
things
part.
that the Democratic Party had come out and attacked you about was that you were some sort of secret Russian spy. But as you detail in your book, the persecution of you just got hotter and hotter when you reported this when it happened. And it should go on record that you didn't just come out with this in 2019 during the election. You had been reporting it all along. There are clips of, is it your mother who was on Larry King in the 90s asking for how to support her child who was sexually assaulted in Washington, D.C.? Like, the proof has been a long paper trail. This is not just something that was come out in order to bring down the Bidens. And so what's my question here? I guess, can you respond to the allegations that you were put up to this by Russia all along, and then, oh, conveniently, you're in Russia?
Yeah, no, that's a myth. And to be really complete, in 2019, when I came forward, I was writing a novel that included Russia from the United States. You know, I was born in Monterey County, California. I grew up in Wisconsin on a farm. I have no ties to Russia, you know, at all, political or otherwise. I have always been fascinated by international relations and geopolitics. So I was doing a novel and I was working and researching that. And I had some opinions that differed from the ones that were being put forth from 2016 on, you know, the Russophobia and all that, which really started heating up in 2016 on. That they pulled those clips after I came forward about Joe Biden as if, and it was just kind of a switch and bait. It was so people would look at that rather than the fact that Joe Biden had been inappropriate with many women, not just me, because I was one of 8 women that came forward, as you might recall. And I was the one with the sexual assault allegations. But there are other women who have been too frightened to come forward because they've seen the amount of harassment and vitriol that's been coming at me from the Democratic leadership. That really heated up. I mean, they accused me of perjury. If you recall, last time I was on your show, I had to get lawyers. I was an expert witness for domestic violence victims. They said I lied about my education under oath. I was threatened with up to 30 years in prison and a criminal investigation. All of that was dropped. I never lied about my education. So then they came at me with that sealed warrant from the DOJ and FBI, which we can talk about in a minute. But it's just been constant, one thing after another, to try to silence me and suppress the story. But it's not just happening to me, it's happening to other people who are journalists who are trying to bring truth, independent journalists trying to bring truth about some of the political things that are happening right now. And the Biden administration, I think, has turned into actually a regime. It's using almost fascist techniques to silence and suppress information.
Now, one of the things that you've also done is sought an appeal under the UN special procedures from a human rights rapporteur. This is the same thing that Julian Assange did in 2018 when he was facing extradition and facing expulsion from the Ecuadorian consulate, is he went to a rapporteur and said, look into this because I am being threatened with encroachment, meaning you're sent back to where you come from and it's dangerous for you there. The United Nations rapporteur, their success rate, I think, for like solving these things is in the 10% or something like that. So do you have expectations? That's according to the rapporteur who was working on the Assange case. So what is your expectations for that process?
Well, you bring up a good point. It doesn't seem very hopeful, does it? My hope is that maybe even EU members like Claire Daly or Mick Wallace will comment on it, or maybe a UN member state might get involved. But at this point, I think legally what has to happen is the special rapporteur has to make an inquiry to the U.S. State Department and say, hey, what's up with this? And what do you have on this? Because we have been trying FOIAs. We have been trying to get that sealed case opened. We're trying to find out about the red notices from Interpol that were supposedly at the border. And we're just getting stonewalled. My attorneys are, and so have journalists actually that have tried to look into it. So I think this mechanism might hopefully bring some transparency, but I think you're right. It's not always very effective in this day and age right now.
And so do you think Representative Jim Jordan is receptive to a testimony on this?
I have not received any answer from him directly. The only members of Congress that have engaged me has been Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene. I know that Matt Gaetz' special counsel was open to me doing this, and they are still opening, but they're not planning on having me testify as long as I'm in Moscow, Russia. That was the last I heard.
Okay.
So we're trying to say, hey, look, why can't I testify remotely? Why can't I have a statement put in? Because I am a citizen, a whistleblower that's being silenced. I mean, I had to seek safety and asylum in another country.
Yeah.
That says everything right there.
Right. I guess this is kind of an obvious question, but I want to ask it. Do you want to be there?
Right now, okay, this is the thing. When I came here, I was on vacation for 7 days. So, and I was telling, Clayton and you, I think, earlier that I had a suitcase with 7 days worth of clothes, not even a coat. And so I'm not, I don't have many of the things that I need with me right now. And that's a bit of a challenge because I can't get mail here.
My understanding is you're going to need a coat in Russia.
Yeah, I am going to need a coat. So I came here for the book. My book was given to an international publishing house here in Moscow that was going to translate it in several languages, including Russian, and redistribute it with 3 additional chapters. And then they accepted another book, the manuscript's due in the fall. And I was so excited about all that. So I thought I was going to go home. There was a family event I was to attend that happened last week, and some other things because my daughter's going to be getting married next year. So I was, I had a lot of plans this summer around family and events. And I was looking forward to an easier schedule because I was just going to have a writing schedule. And and then I was given information that I couldn't go home.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to get too emotional, but I can't tell you what it's like to not know when I'm going to see my daughter, my family, my friends, and my pets. So it's been an adjustment. As far as like here, people here have been lovely to me. I have no complaints. I mean, they're treating me so well. I have enough to eat. I'm okay. I have enough to, I have a place to sleep. I have a safe place to be. I have work that I can do, some writing work and all of that. So, that's all positive. I was looking forward to coming back and forth between Russia and the United States, like Scott Ritter and other people do.
Yeah.
But apparently that option wasn't allowed for me under, these circumstances. And so I'm a little emotional, but I'm also super angry because, Joe Biden he's destroyed my life in 1993 and then in 2019 and then again. And I just feel like, when does it end? And it's not just him because he seems barely coherent, but like his team around him, they're operating with such impunity that I feel like I keep having to say something because I'm not the only citizen being singled out and being oppressed. I mean, he's taking out his political opponent. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I'm not a Republican, but this is, it's startling how America is, basically just been hijacked by the military industrial complex.
Because you are an inconvenient narrative around something that we don't want to see nuance around. And, for those of you who think like, oh, this is just, the Democrat side of what they do to Trump, well, read her book because she has a long list of reaching out for help from day one after this abuse. And so this is not just she was trotted out by somebody. Obviously, you're not being a pawn to someone else's agenda because you're alone in this other than your own lawyers. It's reminiscent of, did you see The Americans? The show?
I did. Mm-hmm.
How the woman Martha has to just be carted off to Russia, and then they sort of treat her as like, look, she's just dropped there. She has to figure out her life, right? Because she was weaponized. Yeah. And so it's heartbreaking. And, I want for you whatever you want for yourself. And, hopefully there is an appetite to stop using the federal government as a weapon.
I think you're right. I think, and the more that your show and other shows can bring attention to this weaponization Matt Taibbi has done some fine work really exposing it. But nothing's really changing. I know Jim Jordan's got this subcommittee going where they're investigating it. It's being exposed. Adam Schiff has just been censured, I believe, but he's making a joke of it. Like he's acting like it's no big deal. But really, I feel lucky that I'm alive. One of the things that Matt Gaetz said to me is he said, Tara, I'm very concerned about your physical safety in the United States. So it wasn't just about, walking into a cage.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that this could happen to me, I want to tell my fellow citizens, this could happen to you. It could happen to any of us. If we push back against the narrative or we have a truth to tell that they don't like, the amount of resources they've expended is startling.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, thank you for telling your story to our audience. And hopefully we do get to hear this in Congress. And there's an appetite to seek out justice, because it can't be equal protection under the law, equal justice under the law. That is the intention of the Justice Department. It does not seem to be functioning that way. So thank you for keeping in touch, and I wish you liberty.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Same
Okay.
to you. It was good talking to you.
Yeah,
Take good care.
always a pleasure. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So heartbreaking to hear.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And, again, this is a story that it's not new. It's not something that, just the right is using because you want to talk about Trump? Well, let's give you this, right? This has been going on for a really long time. I was interested, during the Biden-Trump election, I thought was exactly what it was. So I read her book. She sought help right away. She was told, if you report this, it's going to cost you your career. Do you really want to do it? She said yes. And then she was repositioned and made certain promises within Washington. Like, okay, then we'll give you a good referral. You go away. You do this. It was documented. This is
She's
not
one
a
of 8
new
people that came
thing.
forward. Yeah, this is absolutely the truth.
At the time, she wasn't one of 8. She was alone, right?
Right. But since subsequently, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
but this is a story that breaks apart the, believe all women narrative of the left.
But just to put yourself in her shoes for a moment, anyone watching right now. So she has a book. She's going to Russia to a publishing house to get it translated into another language. She's going to be there for 7 days. She's packed for that amount of time. She's coming home for Mother's Day to be with her daughter. And then she gets a call from Congressman Matt Gaetz, who says, it's not safe for you to come home. Imagine that, because she spoke out against the Biden regime. That's where we're at right now. So just think about this in that context. And we hope that we hear some movement from Congress on this. The weaponization of the weaponization of the United States government against its own people.
Yeah.
For speaking truth. All right, we've got more news to get to here on this Thursday. We're going to be looking at this Dutch housing crisis, which they came after the farmers, took away their farms, and now they're taking away the homes of people who live in the Netherlands. Wait till you hear this new bill that's now moving through the government. You can't make this stuff up. So we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about this gender story, this Boston story, which is being suppressed, by the way. Good luck trying to find really any information about these 4 children who have just been rescued in Boston and what they found. And the mainstream media is silent on this story. Why are they silent on it? Because it's uncomfortable and it reveals an awful lot. But we're going to talk about it because that's what we do here on this show.
That's right.
That's right. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Aura for sponsoring the show today. Very excited to have them sponsoring the show because, look, the dark web is scary and stuff is out there that data brokers are mining your data and selling it. And that's where Aura comes in, because they can track down these dark data brokers and get that stuff taken off of the internet and removed for you, because these dark data brokers are exposing your information and automatically, what Aura will do is automatically submit opt-out requests on your behalf. They'll even opt out of junk mail, telemarketing lists. They'll alert you to someone using your data so you can change passwords or update information so that you're not being stolen from. Just 2 days ago, we had a fraud alert come through and we had to track it down. And someone was using our information to buy
Dick's Sporting Goods.
Dick's Sporting Goods. Like what? Like what? Like, have you been to Dick's Sporting Goods? Like, no, I have not been to Dick's Sporting Goods.
Sorry, that was me.
Oh, it was Philip stole our crap.
What are you buying?
So Aura tracked down Philip and got him. So you see that QR code on your screen? If you want to try Aura.com for free for 14 days to protect yourself from America's fastest growing crime, cybercrime, use that QR code and you can try it. It'll launch and you can try it for free for 14 days. Or you can also go to the website Aura.com/redacted. That's the website you can go to and try it out. And try it for 2 weeks for free to see how many data brokers are sharing your information. In that 2 weeks, you're going to find a whole lot of stuff. It was unbelievable what they found for us when we just signed up during that trial period. Try it 14 days for free. Again, start your free trial today. Go to Aura.com/redacted and use that QR code if you want to. Try it 14 days for free. And try the internet safety tool the only one that you will ever need. It's all inside of one app: password manager, a VPN, a real-time credit and identity theft monitoring, internet parental controls, and protects your devices from malware. Thanks to Aura for sponsoring the show. We really appreciate it.
All right, let's talk about this Dutch housing story because it set my hair on fire today.
Said all my hair is on fire today.
All your hair is on fire.
All my hair is on fire. We're on fire because of what the Dutch government's doing. Well, I'm pissed off. I mean, these guys have already clamped down and taken away the farmers, right? They've gone after 3,000 farms inside of the Netherlands, and they've ruined these people's way of life, and they've completely altered the economy in the Netherlands forever by doing it this way. Now they're doing this.
Okay, so let me tell you what they're doing, because you're right. They were successful in seizing farms, and now they're going after private homes too. In my mind, this is stealing. It's stealing the equity out of private homeowners right out from under them. So see if you see it this way. Last month, we talked about the European Union gave the Dutch government the right to seize farmland for farmers that raise ruminant animals and farm animals. Now they are seizing property by way of dictating how homes are sold. So you own a house, right? And they are going to tell you who you can sell it to and what price. So the Housing Act allows municipalities to force homeowners to sell their homes only to people who have incomes lower or middle of the road incomes, if the home value is less than 355,000 euros. So that would be about $400,000. So if your home is worth that, you cannot sell it for a higher value to people who may be wealthy, right? Which means the price of that home is set. So imagine your home is valued at 300,000. You know now you can only ever make so much equity, and then the investment in your house is capped. They're preventing you from benefiting from market value. Yeah. Everyone else, the wealthy people who are writing these laws, let's be honest, can benefit from appreciation, but not the poorest among us.
Yeah, it's capped at that 355,000, right? Which I love. They rounded it up to a 5, not just 350, 355.
Right.
So anybody above that, rich people, can continue to sell. If they bought it for 700,000 in a few years, they added a pool, whatever. They could sell it for 1.1 million, and they'd be fine, making all of that additional equity.
Totally fine. So we think of let's put even percentages, like 500,000 to $1 million. You can get 50% appreciation if you're wealthy. If you're poor, screw you. You only get this much appreciation. Too bad for you.
Right. It's done under the auspices of trying to help lower and middle income folks buy homes, right? Keeping the prices down artificially. This is what they're doing. Artificially suppressing prices in order to make people homeowners, I guess, under this new plan.
Right. But a recent study in the Netherlands showed that by preventing investors from buying properties in any given neighborhood, that actually drives up rents. So it's not really helping everybody. Here's a study out of the Netherlands, and it shows that a ban on investors in a neighborhood increases rental prices. So, who are we helping here and who are we hurting? Also, it leads to more gentrification.
By the way, we should point out this is not just the Netherlands. You and I were commiserating offline about this about 2 weeks ago. A similar study was done in the United States.
No, this is the same study.
Oh, this is the same one?
Yeah,
Oh,
it
this is the
was.
same one.
It was
Okay.
in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was in the United States. My
no.
bad.
So
My
this
bad.
law is likely to backfire, obviously, because it will increase rents for people who are not buying properties, and it will force people to sell their houses for over $355,000. So, okay, we're above this threshold. So any of the houses that are between $250,000 and $350,000 will just automatically get bumped up. Anyone below that, so below this $250,000 threshold, they're the ones who get screwed the most, because most laws that are progressive like this hurt the poorest first. We know this. This is what the data bears out. Now, they're saying that they want to do this for young people to be able to get into their first house, because young people are not able to get into the housing market. And that does seem to be true. Like this young couple here that are in their 20s saying they were on these long waiting lists to get houses before this law. And then now look, they're rolling out paints on the walls and, go into the Home Depot or whatever the equivalent is in the Netherlands. But if you buy a house that only ever stays at that value, your house is basically just a crappy savings account.
Right. Because the home you live in is not a performing asset, right? You're not renting out the home you live in. So you're paying a mortgage and you are not building cash flow in the way that you would with an investment property or something else. So instead of it appreciating, where maybe down the line you could pull some equity out and you could actually reinvest it into something else, this would be actually an interesting question. Are they going to be able to pull out any kind of an equity position, like a home equity line of credit, to be able to reinvest that in some kind of another asset if they wanted to? Or is that capped too? Because hypothetically, right? I mean, if the value is over that amount, how would they wouldn't be able to pull out the equity then either, would they? Because now they'd be, I wonder if that gets capped above that 355.
Well, if there's an assessment that the home should be this.
Yeah, but they can't tap into that equity because now it's being kept.
You're going on a tangent. So I'm going to pull you right back, because we don't even know if they have home equity lines of credit in the Netherlands.
Okay. I'm just curious. All I'm saying is, but as a savings account, you're right. And now it's just like some sort of, not even a glorified
You're basically
savings.
renting now from the bank, because you can no longer see this as now an appreciating asset. Now, we found this recently when we were researching the Birth Gap documentary, and I thought that this was interesting because here's a tale of two countries trying to solve the same problem. The problem being young people can't get into housing, right? Because housing prices continue to go up. So here is one way that the Netherlands is trying to solve this, which is going to hurt the housing market. Well, under President Putin in Russia, a law says that women are given a stipend if they have children before the age of 25 in order to encourage population growth and presumably have babies before you're too tired, like I did when I had my second child. I got in the shower with socks on. Now, look at the number of families that have received these benefits since 2007. Initially, it was only for the first child, but then when they added in around 2020 the ability to get them for subsequent children, then people are collecting these benefits. In fact, just a friend last night when I was at my book club said that her friend in Moscow used this, and it was like $30,000 to buy into an apartment, because you can use this stipend for healthcare, private school, or you can buy a house. And if you do that, the government subsidy on the mortgage is the government subsidizes the mortgage with this money, and the child becomes part owner of that house. So has that worked? Well, it has shown to slow population decline, and according to Statista, rates of residential home ownership have been on the increase in Russia. So this is interesting, right? We're not saying that other countries don't do it better or there are not other solutions, but here is one solution that seems to not be hurting homeowners,
right? But
in fact, encouraging family home ownership and solving the problem we have in the United States, which is that it costs money to die. So if you pass on that asset, there'll be a tax on it because there's joint ownership with the child now. So it wouldn't cost as much to pass on that asset. But the Dutch government, is saying, oh, but we like the Soviet era way you did things, where we just take assets and distribute them freely, as we see. So they're going to do it that way. If you live in a place that encourages home ownership for young people in a way that does not, in fact, pervert and harm the economy, I would love to hear about it.
And we should also point out, I think this is interesting, Blackstone Group. Blackstone Group is a massive investor in the Netherlands. And about last year, maybe they knew something was up, because last year they swooped in and bought up billions of dollars of homes inside of the Netherlands. I don't know, I'm just saying, I'm throwing that out there. I wonder why that is. That last year they were sort of...
They did it in advance of...
They did it in advance of this. Mm-hmm. I mean, they own 117,000 homes now in the Netherlands. Why is that? I'm just asking. I'm asking for a friend. I mean, billions of dollars now. $1.8 trillion of euros in real estate, American, according to researchers, investors own. And they now have 117,000 homes throughout Europe. And one of the most, the amount that they own is in the Netherlands. I don't know. It's worth putting out there.
Yeah.
How do they know about this ahead of time? And what was their incentive for buying up all these homes ahead of time?
Yeah.
Ahead of this little housing grab up. I don't know. I'm just
That's very convenient.
Yeah,
because they won't be able to, no competitive group will be able to do it ever again. And Clayton and I, we have entire channels and products, educational products, books that we've written about real estate investing. We know and sort of history has proven that the government should not be in the business of housing. They're terrible at it. Usually it ends up, that's why we have an entire term for it called the projects, right? Because these were government projects that turned into slums. We do not want government to interfere with housing markets, even though housing markets do continue to get out of reach. That we agree that that's a problem, and it necessitates creative solutions.
And
there is that saying, if the government gets involved, the cost goes up and the quality goes down. And that's with anything they touch.
Right. Yeah. In fact, here's a quote from Thomas Sowell about socialism. 4 things have almost invariably followed the imposition of controls to keep prices below the level they would reach under supply and demand in a free market. Number 1, increase use of the product or the service whose price is now controlled. So increase use of it. Number 2, reduced supply of the same product or service. And number 3, quality deterioration. And then it's going to wind up on black markets. Now, it'll be interesting to see how housing winds up on the black markets. But number 3, quality deterioration, almost certainly going to happen. What incentive is there for a person to improve their home in order for it to appreciate? They upgraded the kitchen. They did all of this extra work because, you know what, maybe it'll sell at a higher rate when we sell 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. So deterioration will happen. Reduced supply of the same product or service is also going to happen. Mm-hmm. As this constricts in this way, because fewer people are going to want to get involved in this. They're just going to end up renting, which is exactly what they want anyway. You'll own nothing and you'll own nothing and be happy about it.
Grover sneezing. Our dog scared me. Excuse me. Didn't mean to interrupt your point.
That's all right.
I got startled.
I didn't hear it, so I was trying to figure out. I was trying to figure out what you were doing. I was like, what is Natalie doing? She's just like, I thought you were getting like super emotional about the housing market, and I was like, wow, you guys are really into investing. Like Natalie's gonna cry about the loss of the houses in the Netherlands, is what I thought it was going.
Right. Of all the things that I'm going to cry over on the show today, it's not that. Not yet.
All right.
All right. Well, I may cry about this next story. So, are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
Okay. Let me just take a check on the dog. The dog's okay. Okay. Well, here we go. In terms of woke language and gender ideology, what is cross-dressing men? And how are they different than trans-identified biological men? Is the media giving transgender people a pass by calling this group of sexual predators cross-dressing men? Take a look at this story out of Boston today. Now, I made sure to screenshot this, and then I'm going to show you a video later because I am about 85% sure that this will be taken down soon. Because this is an awful story. A group of 4 children under 10 were being kept in a dirty room full of drugs, alcohol, and sex toys. And you can see here, it says they were being held by 6 cross-dressing men. Police only found out about this because one of them had a heart attack and died, and they were called to resuscitate that person. Now, obviously, these are children being abused by male anatomies. But as a journalist, I'm interested in the semantics and how this may further harm children if we don't look at this. In the media, if the media had called these perpetrators trans women because they're men who presented as women, and that's sort of the way the media does now. If a trans person commits a crime, that's why we get these headlines of they assaulted with her penis, right? Daughter of so-and-so kills the father, that kind of thing, even though we know that these are biological men.
And even...
Go ahead.
I was going to say really quick, even the term transvestite used to be used to describe them. Even that could probably cause confusion and why they didn't use that and use cross-dressing men.
So the idea that we are calling them men, do we see this progress, or are we removing the term transgender in a way that makes us ignore the sexual fetishism inside of this movement, which means that more children will get hurt? Right. So if the media had called them trans women, then the headline would have said that the children were being abused by women, which is obviously an insult to the children and what they've been through, something horrifically unimaginable, and, probably minimizes what they've been through, and also an assault to insulting to women. But also, this is a sidestep around transgenderism altogether. It allows us to put aside the idea that trans ideology got its start. It started as autogynephilia, which is how do you describe that? It's when a man loves the feminine aspects of himself and wants other people to see him as feminine, as a sexual fetish. In fact, a study done in Sweden in 2005 found that 2.8% of males experience sexual arousal in response to cross-dressing. So we are supposed to not question whether or not trans ideology can harm people, and now we have evidence that it can. Will we leave this one alone and say, oh, they weren't trans, they were cross-dressers? That's a different thing. Let's move aside. Or will we now be able to admit that many people leading this ideology are hijacking the movement for their own perverted gains? I think that would be a helpful thing to admit so that we are able to parse out who has gender ideology in a way that will harm nobody and who is using gender ideology to advance perversions.
Right. So basically, as someone in the chat says, basically grown men abusing little children, and the media covers it up.
Right. So we're deciding, who are we protecting here, right? They are deciding to protect
the perpetrators.
The perpetrators and not the children.
The perverts.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine now, what would the article read when you're reading about BTK now? The BTK killer, the serial killer. He did that. He dressed as a woman and would,
That's a great point.
I don't know how much I can say on YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah, the BTK killer. Well, you don't have to go into all of that, but yeah, that's exactly what he did. And and so they would probably, we've seen it. Why do we still not know about the Tennessee the shooter? Why do we still not know what was in that what was it, not dossier, what am I trying to say, the diary, the what do you call it, dossier,
the manifesto.
That's the word I'm trying to say. We still don't know about that. They're protecting, there's a track record now of protecting these perpetrators.
Yes. Now, most coverage of this horrific story does not mention the cross-dressing at all. It's just that children were kept in this sort of room of sexual horrors, and that's it. And that's an unconscionable lie, an omission. I saved this clip. Again, I saved it because what's interesting is, like, when you download videos from a website, you usually get whatever it is you can see. So I use a program that extracts videos. I tried to extract this video, and all I got was the live news broadcast from last night in Boston. And this piece that's on this website was omitted from the live broadcast, but it still is up. I was not able to download it, so I did a screen movie, which is why the audio is a little bit tinny, because this man says cross-dressing men were the perpetrators. That, again, will be removed from consciousness in order to protect trans ideology, but watch him say it anyway. We do have our own record now.
First responders were called here to these apartments on Saturday for an apparent cardiac arrest. When they got here, they discovered someone had died and also found that several people were hiding children in a back room. Tonight, 4 children less than 10 years old are in DCF custody after authorities and public officials say they were found in an apartment with 6 cross-dressing men, sex toys, drugs, and alcohol. Firefighters discovered them after one of those adults died at the apartment.
It was obviously sickening, to hear from those that were there.
Okay. Again, I just want to present this because distorted reality has real world consequences. And, what you think of as acceptance and progressive values must be critically examined, because we can't just say oh, that hurts our ideology, we can't discuss it. Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
Well, I find it weird. I find it weird that in that instance, why is what they're wearing have any bearing on anything at all? It'd be like they're saying 6 men in tracksuits. Why does what they were their clothing have anything to do with the story?
Yeah,
it's just
they were all wearing
to bring up to me.
Six Mets fans.
Because they're feeding us a way to sidestep the transgender ideology. That's my hypothesis.
Yeah.
Because if we call them trans, it's extremely uncomfortable for this movement, especially during Pride Month. You guys, right?
Yeah.
I think that they're giving us. Yeah, they're giving us a sort of a more comfortable way to talk about it, so we don't have to actually talk about it.
And I wondered, imagine the story if those 6 cross-dressing men saved those children, they would probably be praised as trans.
Sure.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, these 6 heroes, these are transgender heroes that saved these children. But because they're living in squalor and man died and there's sex toys and alcohol and these kids are living in this filthy, awful condition and who knows what sort of perversion was being perpetrated on these children. They're just cross-dressing men.
Right.
Look the other way.
I think that this is, if you're willing to look at it, it's proof that the trans ideology is so many things stuffed into one thing. It has very little to do with the social contagion that is taking part on young girls. Being sort of put on young girls who are going through puberty. It's different, but there are legitimate perverts who will benefit from it if we are unwilling to look it directly in the eye. Here's another real world consequence of gender ideology. A new Gallup poll shows that support for same-sex marriage has dropped by 7% last year. Sorry, that's hard to see. 71% in 2022 supported gay marriage. That's down now to 64%. Could this be because gender ideology has hijacked gay rights into something totally different and, in my opinion, homophobic? The culture wars about gender dysphoria presents this false equivalency between sexual deviance and homosexuality. Doesn't need to be like that. It also indicates that gender preference is bigoted, which causes abuse and exclusion of lesbian and gay groups. That is happening. It's no wonder that gay rights are being eroded under gender ideology. Who saw this coming? Everybody who's gender critical. Kathleen Stock from the get-go. Because trans rights are not gay rights. They are two opposite things. Gay people actually need biological sex to be real, or they don't exist. And we are watching them be erased.
I was going to say, and that's why there's a movement to remove the T, because it's it is guilty by association. I think a lot of people now, because there's this small LGBTQ minority in there that are very loud and doing nefarious things. It's like the whole group is guilty by proxy. So it's like, They want away from that. They don't want that because it is affecting their rights.
Yeah. Look at the gay flag. I mean, look what happened there. It's been infiltrated.
Yes.
You've got this now chevron that's come on from the side. It's like infiltrating it. And then you're adding in now, all sorts of other symbols and things to this flag.
Yeah. We've gone over how that was tacked on to the civil rights movement that brought about gay rights. I won't go over it again. But I think that it's interesting because, again, this movement has been hijacked by ideologues that prey on the insecurity of pubescent children and also prey on open doors and access to children. And I think that if we really want to be progressive, we start with the vulnerable first. And the vulnerable are not men who like cross-dressing. The vulnerable are children.
Children.
Yeah. Children first. Speaking of children, one physician at a major U.S. hospital gave this interview recently, called themselves a whistleblower, about how medical mandates are no longer based on science. I don't know if it's a he or a she, actually. because it's anonymous, because physicians are punished for speaking out about this. So I'm going to use they, but not for gender ideology, but because I legitimately don't know. He or she says that COVID and gender ideology are linked inextricably. Says, during 2020, transgender ideology and COVID became inextricably linked. Normally, doctors operate by the authority of the professional societies that govern our specific practice. That worked because the individuals in those institutions were reliable, intelligent, and thoughtful. But with COVID in 2020, we started getting medical decrees without peer review or evidence. You saw this with masks, social distancing, and emergency use authorization. Those decrees were expressed as something everyone had to do without justification based on sound science. And then came the censorship. And he says, you were punished if you spoke out about this. Like, hey, how do we know that? Where's the science about masks? What about this study that already proved that masks can cause negative effects in your health? Can't.
Yeah, shut up. You're not allowed to ask these questions.
The next slide, I think this is really interesting because he's talking about how you're not supposed to do harm to your patients. You should be committed to never harming them. He says, in reality, or she, when you affirm these individuals' gender identity, what you're doing is affirming their hatred for themselves. You have these children who are going through these confusing times, difficult times. When you affirm this belief system, what you're doing is telling them, you hate yourself at this moment. I will affirm that. We have to ask ourselves, why do these people have such high rates of suicide? Because we're affirming that they should hate themselves and that they should try to destroy themselves. So again, the progressive media sort of hops around these words and concepts because they think it's enlightened and educated and the right thing to do. In my opinion, not looking at this more critically is the cowardly thing to do. So we decide to look at these awful truths.
The sad part is where does it end? Because I've seen a lot of TikTok videos of people now trying to create this category called MAPS, minor attracted people.
Yeah.
And so that article could have been totally different and been like these cross-dressing MAPS and that being a good thing because they can't help who they're attracted to. There are people defending that on TikTok.
Yeah. Now it's becoming a protected class.
Yeah, that's interesting. Why wouldn't they have given them that as a decoy around transgender issues?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, how
missed opportunity, media.
Yeah, Boston local media.
Right. Well, I would like to also point out that like maps are not something that anybody in the LGBT TQ community is trying to get in. It's the maps trying to put themselves there.
Yes.
Nobody's saying, "Hey, come on in." They're not. It's not like
there are.
It's not like the people are like, "No, we see it that way." Well, yeah, but not really. They're probably just maps.
Right, their maps trying to get in and like, hey, just because I'm into little children. Come on, can you add me to the flag too? We're adding everyone else to this flag. Can you add us now? And that's normal. I mean, you literally have legislators that are saying that that's okay. We've covered it here on the show.
Yeah.
And of course, we should mention also what happened in Arkansas over the past 24 hours because a judge has now thrown out the legislation that prevented gender ideology medicalization of children. So now you have a judge throwing this out. I spoke to Dr. Peter McCullough about this earlier today, and he said, this is going to go to the Supreme Court. This because a number of states have now put this in place to protect children, and you have a judge stepping in to saying, no, you can have sex change for children, and they can do it without parental consent. And this is going to go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
It's really, really scary stuff. Eugene Reade in our chat says, Redacted is doing one hell of a professional job. This is the way that you report the news. Well, thank you, Eugene.
That's nice
it's a great comment there. And I just wanted to call it out because this is a story that's incredibly important. I think Natalie did an amazing job with it. And I think also that the mainstream media is totally ignoring this story. And they're ignoring it for the very reason they're protecting the perpetrators. And they're protecting these perverts. And that's where we are right now. So call up, if you're in the Boston area, call up your local media and ask them why they're not covering this story and doing more of a deep dive on it. All right.
We got through that one.
Well, we've got more news to get to. We're going to talk about Peter Hotez because, boy, the mainstream media is doing all it can to protect Dr. Peter Hotez from going on Joe Rogan's podcast and doing a debate with RFK Jr. And they're doing everything they can to discredit RFK Jr. while at the same time protecting Dr. Peter Hotez. We're going to do a deep dive on that in just a moment. But first, we should tell you about our store. We've got a great store if you'd like to support independent journalism and what we do here. You can do that by going to redactedstore.com and pick up a mug, pick up a hat, pick up a hoodie. We've got some polo shirts, some bottles. You got some tumblers in there, some stickers. I love my dog walking hat. My gray faded vintage dog walking hat. That's my Redacted hat that I wear when I'm walking the dog. And I love my Redacted hoodie. So anyway, to support what we do here on the show, if you want to pick up some merch, you can do that by going to redactedstore.com. Redactedstore.com is the place to pick up your Redacted merch. Well, it looks like we're watching the self-destruction of Dr. Peter Hotez, who continues to publicly defend his decision to not go on Joe Rogan and have any kind of debate over his position on COVID vaccines, his involvement in gain-of-function research, and all of it. And the mainstream media seems hell-bent on doing everything it can to defend Dr. Peter Hotez, and almost as if there's money involved somehow. Well, we don't know. Dan Cohen has been tracking this story before anyone else was covering this story many, many months ago for Redacted, and is watching this sort of self-implosion happen in real time. Dan, what's the latest on this story?
Well, Clayton, like you said, the media is completely coming to the defense of Peter Hotez, who has refused to defend his positions on the Joe Rogan podcast, which he has appeared on before and had a friendly platform and multiple times. So it's a total about face, so a total reversal from his previous position. And if you look at his statements, the statements that Peter Hotez made in 2020, where he explicitly said that it's important for scientists to go on television channels and appear in the media to defend so-called science. Well, it's a total, he's made a complete reversal. So look at this. He says in 2020, in his article called Combating Anti-Science, he says, "It is now increasingly apparent that it will fall to the scientists themselves to respond, engage a skeptical public, and lead the defense of science." Okay? In May 2020, right around the same time, he says, "The communications and missteps around the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines may require a period of damage control." He's, of course, referring to the constant flip-flopping. For example, when he said that emergency use authorization should not be used and that it's dangerous. And then, of course, he knew that later, when it was time when Trump was going to be out of office and Biden would be the president, then he was going to completely reverse. And he carries on and says, "It will be essential for the White House, together with the NIH and other elements of our science infrastructure, to shape a well-crafted vaccine communication plan that must also designate a trusted spokesperson who can articulate and carry the message." So for his strategy, it's very important to be out front. And that's why we've seen Peter Hotez on corporate media, on MSNBC, CNN, Fox, Bloomberg, all of them constantly for the past 3 years. Only when he gets a friendly platform where he's just going to be treated like some kind of genius who's unquestionable, and no matter how many times he contradicts himself or outright lies. So now that he's been exposed and we see his total hypocrisy from his previous statements on why scientists should be in the media, the mainstream media has come once again to his defense. So we have the BBC, we have the Washington Post, whose their op-ed says Joe Rogan wants a debate on vaccines. That's just the problem. Okay, we have Time Magazine says Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is dead wrong about vaccines. That's the op-ed from Time, which, I mean, if he's dead wrong, it sounds like it would be really easy to debunk to discredit RFK Jr., who is rising in the polls. So these guys obviously don't want to do that. But there is a very friendly relationship between not only Peter Hotez and these media outlets, but Peter Hotez's sugar daddy, his paymaster, none other than Bill Gates. There's a very friendly relationship and financial relationship between Hotez, and Bill Gates, and also between Bill Gates and these very media outlets. The BBC has taken millions of dollars from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so that certainly would shape their interest. Time Magazine, that article was written by Gavin Yamey, who works at Duke University's Center for Policy Impact in Global Health. Now, Duke University is funded heavily by the Gates Foundation to the tune of $10.6 million. And the Center for Policy Impact's website explicitly says it is funded by the Gates Foundation, among others. There's another article from Bloomberg, authored by Tyler Cowen, saying, if Joe Rogan asks you to debate, be suspicious. Bloomberg, of course, owned by Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire, has a close relationship with Gates. Gates Foundation has even given money to Bloomberg's foundation. So all of these op-eds, there is a sort of financial and ideological weaving and relationship that, of course, is not disclosed. So it's, again, you just see this very top-heavy apparatus coming to the defense of Peter Hotez as he's, as you described, self-imploding, embarrassing himself on a national stage where he had a completely neutral platform and has decided to flush that away because he knows he can't defend his positions, against anyone who has, like RFK, who knows what he has said and what he's done, and has looked into a lot of the actual science behind these pharmaceutical products, or to anyone who's even a Redacted watcher who watched our investigations from January that exposed Hotez as a fraud.
Yeah, and it's not even just the vaccine part of it, right? Because you can have a debate about the vaccine efficacy. We now know the new documents that came out from a Freedom of Information Act request, of course, on vaccine mandates, and how those vaccine mandates, how they were precipiced, which was basically on a foundations of a lie. But even beyond that, his involvement at NIH, his involvement going back many, many years to gain-of-function research, like that to me seems to me what they're trying to hide here, or they're trying to do their best to keep him shielded, right? So talk a little bit about that, his history in this, because the vaccine and discussions about the vaccine, that's one thing. We can look at all the data now that's come out on this, but his involvement in this and how he received money and how dirty he is, that's really what they're worried about, I think.
Well, his entire career has been funded by not only by Bill Gates, but by Anthony Fauci, who's taken huge amounts of money from, as we exposed in January in our redacted investigations, that the NIH under Fauci has given millions and millions of dollars to Peter Hotez. And Peter Hotez completely denies that he's funded by Big Pharma or tied to Big Pharma. He's been funded by Pfizer since the very beginning, since he came out of school. When I believe he became a PhD. His first fellowship was funded by Pfizer. He had another Pfizer fellowship in 2003 at Stony Brook University in New York. He still maintains close relationships with Pfizer. I've shown that before, that I think they wine and dine him is what it apparently is. And so he is completely part of Big Pharma, biosecurity complex. And so you're right. It's more than just the vaccines. It's everything that this guy represents. He is the biosecurity complex personified. That's what Peter Hotez is. And so anyone who has an open mind like Rogan, or anyone who's more informed like RFK, he cannot handle that kind of debate. So he would just be instantly exposed. I mean, do you remember the clip where Rogan said, "Do you exercise? Do you eat well?" Peter Hotez melted down. He couldn't even handle that question. He embarrassed himself and looked like a goon, and that probably has done more damage to him than our investigation. I don't know. Just the fact that Rogan asked him that question, it just embarrassed him.
And it's just a simple question: are you healthy? Do you eat healthy? And he just, I think I don't know, I remember exactly what he said, but it was not a good answer. It was not a good answer. Joe Rogan, you have the Vox piece too. And it's amazing when you have, Hotez loves to retweet these articles over the past 48 hours. He's been like sort of any article that's favorable to him, telling him not to have a debate. He's been out there retweeting these things, as you pointed out in some of these messages. But one of my favorites is this Vox Media piece. So from Vox.com, Joe Rogan wants a debate on vaccine science. Don't give it to him, reads the headline from Vox. What? Don't give it to him? Because it's really personal. It's only going to be him in a room. No one else is going to be listening. The millions of people that listen to this, it's only going to be him that's going to hear it, I guess.
Exactly. They cannot handle any kind of questioning and any kind of debate. And I think, Clayton, the really important thing to understand about Peter Hotez is not, and what he represents really, is not just that he won't have a debate and that he's an intellectual coward and fraud, is that he actually wants to criminalize people who ask questions about vaccines and pharmaceutical products. So he has explicitly said that he wants the US government, the World Health Organization, NATO, the United Nations to treat so-called anti-science aggression, meaning, any parent who thinks, well, do I want to put this syringe full of some product I don't know anything about into my child's leg, into my infant's leg? I don't know. That person, according to Peter Hotez, should be treated as a terrorist. He literally calls them terrorists. So what does that mean? I mean, does that mean, they should be censored? Does that mean they should be imprisoned? Does that mean, I don't know, we should have the CIA's drones go and launch strikes on them because that's what we do with terrorists? That's what, we do with alleged terrorists in the United States, anywhere they are in the world. So, I mean, you get a sense.
Well, this reminds me of Jimmy Kimmel. Remember when Jimmy Kimmel, sort of that same sentiment, Jimmy Kimmel during the pandemic, the quote unquote pandemic, when he said, if you die, well, that's on you then.
Unvaccinated guy who gobbled horse goo, rest in peace, Wheezy.
Basically that's okay, sort of like thinning out the herd, natural selection to his mind. Like, are you too stupid to get vaccinated? Therefore, you should die if you don't get vaccinated.
Exactly. And anyone who doesn't go along with this, who doesn't take their own health into their own hands, do their own research, consider, that's what medicine always was, traditionally has been, is your doctor consults you and helps you make a decision, not tries to force you to do what they say under threat of censorship or arrest or anything else. But in this kind of, strange new world of medicine, Peter Hotez is the kind of, really embodies the logic and the ethos of, take the injection and shut up. And if you don't want to, then it's your fault if you die. And that's all it is.
Unbelievable. Well, we continue to watch Dr. Peter Hotez. Maybe, if he doesn't want to debate RFK Jr., there's others that have stepped forward. Cardiologist Dr. Peter McCullough, who've said, I'll be happy to sit down and do a debate with him. Been on the show before, and if you want a scientist, here we go. We'll have a debate there. I would love to see it. I want to have a good discussion. I don't care if it's RFK Jr. or somebody else. Dan Cohen, thank you for this. Thank you for the updates on Dr. Peter Hotez, man who was out in front on this story many, many months before everyone else. Dan, great to see you.
Thanks, Clayton.
And thanks, Dan. And thanks to all of you for being a part of our great community here. Again, we hit 2 million subscribers this week. That is totally crazy to me. And 350,000 subscribers on Rumble. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We're all seeking the truth together here on this journey. So thank you guys so much. And hey, we have a Redacted Rebels VIP community. If you'd like to be a part of it for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support independent journalism. Again, we are not funded by George Soros or Pfizer or any of these other big companies that fund a lot of the mainstream media that, of course, you see on cable news and everywhere else. We're funded by you and supported by you. So again, if you'd like to come over and support us, you can. And we give you some access to some great content ahead of anybody else. You'll get to see it before anybody else does as a Redacted Rebel VIP. In fact, we've got a new video that's going to drop tomorrow for our Redacted Rebel VIP community, specifically on 9/11 and Building 7. You don't want to miss this. Again, here's where to go. Go to redacted.inc. It's not .com. Come over to redacted.inc, and there you can click on the Redacted Rebels VIP community. And like I said, for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support independent journalism, support our show. We'll have Redacted live streams that are just for members only, as well as other exclusive content, which is there. And if you're watching us on Rumble, all you need to do is click the red join button, which is our locals community. So it is all built on our locals platform. So again, no pressure, but if you'd like to support us in that way, you can absolutely do it. If not, hey, the show is free. You can just subscribe on YouTube and subscribe on Rumble and get the show for free as well. That's another way to support us. So thank you guys so much for an amazing week. We really appreciate it. We'll be back on Monday at 4 p.m. live at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Until then, everyone have a great weekend.